We are a video tutorial for homework number 2, the street trace or the animation of the New York street scene. Here I have uh, my drawing sitting in a layer on top of the photograph. Okay, I'd like to lock both of these layers by clicking on the little lock sign. Uh, when you're trying to animate something or move something around or even erase something, it's very easy to accidentally modify a layer beneath. Unlike Photoshop, if you're erasing something, it'll erase through every layer that is editable. So, say I'm drawing a little rectangle, and I try to, if this drawing beneath isn't unlocked, or sorry, if it isn't locked, and I am trying to move this thing, I could accidentally grab something behind. If I'm trying to select this, it'll select through to all the layers. Oops, and then I lose my drawing. Or if I'm erasing, and the erasing tool, the erase tool is horrible. So it could actually erase through to the layer beneath. So anything you do, you can undo just by clicking Command Z or going up to the File menu, Undo. Doing that enough times, you'll eventually get back what you need. It by default, Animate preserves 100 levels of undo because there's a lot of unpredictable things that can happen when you're first learning the software. So definitely lock the layers that you don't want to be edited. Okay, now I'm going to try to do this faster. I recorded it once before, but I took too long, too wordy. Okay, we want this to be 10 seconds. When we have clicked off of everything, like clicked on the side so nothing's selected, and our selection tool is the one that we have selected, this by default, the properties panel by default shows us the universal properties of the file. It shows us the frames per second, FPS. 24 is the default. That's the kind of traditional standard of film. That's how many seconds play through, or how many frames play through in a second. The timeline here shows us numbers, numerical progression in frames rather than in seconds or anything like that. I've already lengthened these frames to be the right length. We want this to be between 6 and 10 seconds. So I've actually multiplied 10 seconds times 24 frames, discovering that 240 frames is 10 seconds at 24 frames per second. I already extended my background layers to last for that long. As is, when you start out, like your frames will maybe, or your drawings will maybe be only one frame or several frames long. It's very easy to make them last for that whole extent of time by just scrolling with the scroll button to 240. I'm going to go to 240, and then you can actually select multiple layers on this frame. Just select one layer or multiple layers. So you only have to do it in one step. Right click and say Insert Frame. If you just insert a standard frame, that inserts a hold frame, meaning that nothing will change between this keyframe in frame 1 and when everything disappears at the end. Your ultimate animation, should be said, will be as long as you have frames defined. So right now it will be 10 seconds long. Everything over here isn't defined, doesn't exist yet. Okay, so I'm going to start off by doing something very simple. I'm going to, first off, again, you can play through. Nothing's going to happen here, but you can see the playhead moving, what the speed it's moving at is. Nothing's happening on the screen. I've created already a new frame by clicking on this new frame, or sorry, new layer, by clicking on this new layer button. And I'm going to decide what we want to focus on are changes happening to the scene in a naturalistic feeling kind of time. That means that not every little event that happens on screen is happening instantly or at the same time. We don't want this collision of all events, this kind of cataclysmic thing. We want it to be a believable street scene kind of time space. So I'm just going to go somewhere here in the middle and just decide, oh, maybe there's going to be a shade opening up to reveal you know, a light on in the apartment around frame 80. And how many seconds in is that? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's like three seconds in, 3.5 seconds in. So I'm going to either convert or insert keyframe. It's not really going to make a difference right now for what I say. And because I've inserted a keyframe there, it's defined on this layer just an empty keyframe from frame 1 to frame 80, where I'm going to actually make a change. I'm zooming in, and I'm going to zoom in on this window, and I'm just going to progressively draw a kind of yellow rectangle, getting larger and larger and larger to suggest that the shade is rising. And again, rectangle tool, I can take my color picker and choose what I want. I don't want there to be a stroke and outline. I can choose for there to be no stroke by clicking on this line through rectangle thing. I can also choose no fill if I want to. If I just want an outline and no filling, then I can do that too. So I'm just going to start off with a sliver of window. And then I can go like a couple frames down and actually hit F6 to convert to keyframe. I can also convert to blank keyframe, but I want to convert to keyframe because it will copy over the drawing from the prior keyframe. So now I have this little sliver of window. I can either redraw the window a little bigger, or I'll do this. I'll just deselect and I'll distort it like this to open it up a little more. I can make it kind of go a little skewy. It's like the Venetian blinds, you're kind of like pulling them up, but they're not going quite, you know, parallel. And then I can go to the next, and again F6. And I can also do something like, let me even this out again. I don't want it to be a total mess. You can also click on select the entire everything that's on this layer by just clicking on the keyframe itself, which is a really handy way to do things if you have a lot of detail. I can also change the size of this with the free transform tool. You can see it kind of expands it in a way that I'm not comfortable with right now. We'll talk about the anchor point, but if I turn this anchor point down, then I can move the shade up. A couple ways to skin the cat here, and I made a new keyframe. Let's do this quickly. Okay. And you can make any change. You can completely redraw this image in this keyframe. A simple keyframe allows you to make any kind of change you want. It's not just affecting this one drawing. You can do whatever you like. So I'm distorting this so it fills up the whole space for the window. So you can see it kind of going up. It's very kind of staccato. If I wanted to, I could really smooth this out by defining these frames in between and making the movement smoother. And we'll definitely get into that. But what I want ultimately is I want the frame to come up, and I want it to stay open. So I want this final keyframe to hold all the way to the end. So I'm just going to go to the final frame here on this layer and right-click and insert frame. And so now it's up for the whole extent. And now I'm going to save this project. Make sure to save as you go. Street Trace 2018 number 2. I'm going to save it to the desktop for now, so I don't have any trouble with this. Okay, now I'm actually going to create a new layer. I'm actually going to have someone pass in front of the window. So let's start a new layer. It's just always a good idea. If you wanted a different kind of motion or a different motion, you can do it on the same layer. You can do whatever you want with that. You can add to the drawing, but keeping things separate just makes it a whole lot easier when you need to change something. So I'm going to convert to a keyframe. I'm going to zoom in. I'm using a Wacom tablet, so let's use the brush. And I turned on already the pressure sensitivity that pops up when I'm using the Wacom. And I'm going to get a black color, but I want it to be not totally black. I'm going to make it a little translucent. I can turn down the alpha level. You can see what happens there. You can see through the mark. It's great for smoke and that kind of thing. So it doesn't really matter for this, but if you zoom in, you have a little more control over the precision of your line and everything. I'm just going to start him there. I don't really like that little piece that I drew that overlaps. I'm going to use, I need to close off the shape. Sometimes it's hard to see whether, you can just scribble him full of color. Oh, by the way, something to repeat, for the brush tool, the line that you draw is actually defined by your fill color, which is different than some of your other drawing tools. I'm going to have him just sort of move across the space. Go to keyframe, move him across. Okay, and then he's gonna kind of pass through, and I need to fill in the rest of his body. So you can do any kind of little changes to your drawing as you go. Oops. I'm going to get rid of this part, this little section. You can go forward a frame with a period and back a frame with a comma, which is really handy. The more you can do with keyboard shortcuts, the more time you're going to save. And I'm going to fill this in. Now you can also fill in these empty little pieces with the paint bucket tool. Boop, boop, boop. Oops. Okay. I'm actually moving him. I'm selecting the whole drawing with, by clicking on the keyframe itself, and I'm actually moving it with the arrow keys. If it's just a little movement, it's sometimes easier or quicker, or I don't know, more efficient to just move it with the arrow keys rather than. And you see how I just dragged and drop selected that whole section so that I could erase the part that should be cropped out by the edge of the window. Convert to keyframe, move them a little more, and then the selection tool, crop that part out, convert to keyframe, move them a little more, same thing. It's so, this program is frustrating in some ways, but it's so kind of sandboxy. And the drawing tools, I'm just going to erase it now, he's gone. And you can see that when I erased everything that was on the screen, that was on this layer, it becomes this empty circle. That's a good indication of whether you have information there or not. If it's an empty circle like that, there's nothing there. So you can see he passes across the window. I can do things like make him, kind of have a little like up and down movement. But then I have to erase where he overlaps. This up and down movement, we'll talk about this when we go to walk cycles. It adds believability here. I can even map out the kind of basic steps in the movement, the basic landmarks of movement, and then I can actually go in and refine it, smooth it out, add kind of nuance to it by going in here and then defining the in-between frames. I can select these two and convert them both to keyframes. So right now they're both, I converted these two keyframes, and so they're actually the same. They just copy the drawing from the prior frame. So I want them to actually like be, kind of steps, more granular steps in between this position and this position, so it's not as kind of like jerky, right? one thing we'll talk about next week is using onion skin. And onion skin is great. It actually lets you see the prior frames and the latter frames. Latter frames tend to go green, and earlier frames, prior frames, go blue. And you can see more frames later by sliding these handlebars around. So I'm going to make this frame, or sorry, this position of the drawing here be somewhere in between this frame on the left and this frame on the right. So I'll just move him a little bit to the right. And then this frame will be, I think, like there. I don't know, let's see how that looks. Turning the onion skin off allows us to see things. Okay, so that's like a little smoother instead of this jerkiness. And I could go in and refine all in between frames like that. So you can see how it goes a little smoother at the beginning, and then it gets jerky again. And that's up to you. You don't have to do such refining on this project. It's just about the event. So now we have actually what I would consider two events. And they don't happen until a little later. So the shade comes up, the person passes through in front of the window, and we'll save it again. Another event I'm going to have happen is the car will come down the street, and I can then import to stage. Whoops. And I want to make sure before I do that, anything that we want to move separately, we want to have on its own layer. So I'm going to start a new layer, and I should really name things as I go. I'm not the most careful or organized person in that regard. I should be, and you should be too. So import to stage. And here we have, where is it? Where is my download? It's called 70s something. Well, okay, it's, oh, did I not say import? Import to stage. It should do it. Where? It's here. It doesn't want to import. Well, I know where it is existing. Didn't I take it to the desktop? I thought I did. Oh, I don't know how that happened. So yeah, you can import all these kinds of files, PSDs. It'll keep all the layers or all the layers in your PSD file separate for those who care about that kind of thing. I'm importing a JPEG, which is fine. For some reason, I had where is it? 70s. Oh my lord, I'm using half the recording here. Just looking through my file. There it is. 70s. I should just tell that car in the future. Here's my fancy car. I've put it on its own layer. And so even for a JPEG or something like that, you can animate this stuff, of course. You can create new keyframes and move it around. But I don't want to do that. We have more flexibility here, and especially because we're dealing with this background, we can't actually really easily clip this out. We can, but it's not really what we want. So I'm just going to size it properly with the free transform tool, holding shift to keep the proportions right. And if I wanted to flip it like I did, I just scale it down until it flips back on itself, and the image will flip. It's really cool that way. And then I want to create a new layer, and this is going to be the trace layer. I'm going to lock the drawing layer, and then just, I don't have a lot of time here, so I'm going to really roughly trace it. Turn that alpha all the way up to get my full solidity, full opacity. And let's make it like a, whatever. Let's make it a weird green color. Okay. Just trace it really roughly. Nothing fancy here. Okay. And then fill it in with a paint bucket tool and then turn off the visibility of the other drawing, or of the JPEG. And so now I'm going to start it off the stage. We'll just have it kind of slowly make its way across throughout the timeline. Insert keyframe, convert to keyframe. It's going to be kind of a lemon, so I'll have it bounce up and down a little bit, maybe hit a couple of potholes. And of course, a real car would, you'd see this smooth, relatively smooth, maybe somewhat jerky motion across the stage. For our purposes, that's up to you how smooth you make this happen. And you can always just lay out the larger, the larger positions, or the main positions, and then kind of go in there, define these in-between frames as keyframes, and then smooth out that motion. And we'll talk later on in the semester, very soon actually, about how to do automated movements, which will be called tweens. So you can have very easily a smooth motion across the stage. Super easy stuff to do. But let's start off pure and simple, and then you can go back in and, if you want this thing to, have a little bounce or something, you can, or you can make it it's a kind of complicated image. You can just distort it in that way, but you can make it rock back and forth a little. If it's hitting a pothole, not a big deal. I just want you to be comfortable with making, nuancing your events in that way. So here we have, let's save it. If you want to test the movie, you can go to Control Test, and you have things as they will show up when you export the file. And so there you see the shade raising. And there's one thing you don't want on the screen here, which is that hidden layer showing up. I like to go, by default, the preferences are set that all hidden layers show up on export. By going to File, Publish Settings, I can actually turn that off, unclicking Include Hidden Layers. When we finally export our file by hitting Publish, it's going to save to the working folder, which is here in our desktop. So just be aware of where it's going to save. At any time, you can publish your file. Oops, I should have saved that. So I don't want to include hidden layers. You can go to File, Publish whenever you're ready. There's also all these export options for exporting as other file types. But Control Test now shows us our output file without that hidden layer. And the thing's coming up there, and the guy walks in front of the window. Oh, here's something to remind you about. Our native export type is also in vector graphics, which means that you can blow it up as big as you want, and it will never become pixelated. But also it shows you the edges, which is kind of annoying. You can turn on this cropping tool, which shows you only what will be in the exported file. So you don't see the car when it's off the screen. This is a little bit more of a clean view. Okay, so we're going to do one more thing to finish this out. We're going to make the whole scene go to night. I'm going to create a new layer. I'll call this dark. And I'm going to start it off. Okay, I'm going to do this rectangle here. Whoops, wrong color. If I want to change the color of this, I don't need to do a paint bucket. I can just click on it to select it and then change the fill color. I'm going to have the whole scene eventually go to this color, but a slightly less than 100% alpha. So it's going to go to this dark. But I don't want to start off that way. I'm going to go and define a keyframe here near the end. Convert to keyframe. So here's the final state. I don't want it to start out that way though. I want it to start out as daytime. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to click on this to get the properties of its actual shape. Turn the alpha to 0. And when you have transparency and you have the subject selected, it won't show the transparency. It's going to show the solid color until you deselect. So now you can't see it at all. I'm going to now go to this frame. Let's see, and convert to keyframe. Click on it to get its properties, and then I'll turn up the alpha to like 12%. So you can see what it is now. You can see it's a little darker. Now, just make a couple of changes throughout the course of events here. Now turn up the alpha to 20 something. You can see it's a little darker now. You can see how I scrubbed through the time. That's the kind of speediest way to see that progression happen. Okay, I'm going to convert to keyframe here. And then 40, convert to keyframe here. Oh no, let's keep it a little lower than that. Let's say 60. Okay. What was my final? All the way down here I have like something that's not that much different. Here it was what? 70? Okay. Something. So I'll just make the final change happen there. Oops, put it in the wrong layer. What layer is this? Put a keyframe. Yeah, it's name your layers. It's very easy to lose track of what you're working on, which is what I often will do myself. What was this one? This was just the car itself. Yeah, there's a car. Okay. Car drawing. There you go. Lock it. Okay, so now you can see this gradual. Whoops. I want to deselect. I'll just lock that so I don't have a selection. Okay, you can see the gradual progression to night from day. Oh, but here's something. I want the window not to be dimmed. The light source is not going to be dimmed in this way. So I'm going to actually I'm going to find my window and my little man for the window. Remember, like the actual stacking order of layers here is going to make a big difference. Is going to make a difference in how they visually stack. So this is the man, and this is the window. And I'm going to move both of these guys on top. I held Shift to select multiple layers. Move these guys up. You can see that actually selecting or even right-clicking on the area that's part of the layer name allows you to like copy layers, paste layers, and that's different from right-clicking in the area that is the frames. So I move those layers up, and now that light in the window is going to be this really striking focal point in the scene. Our attention just goes right to it. It becomes pretty dramatic, actually, at the end there. Okay, oops. Look what I did. I accidentally moved some of my layers a little bit, or I added frames where I didn't mean to, and so now they exist after everything else disappears. And if you want to just remove a couple frames, you just right-click and remove frames. Removing frames is better than clearing frames. Clearing frames gets rid of the keyframe. That's something important to mention. If you clear the frame, it gets rid of the information or the changes within that frame. Clearing keyframe clears the keyframe. The change has been made. And well, I don't want to do that. About to sneeze. And removing frame actually just gets rid of the frame itself. So I think this is the end. I don't want to go on over long, but now you can hit Control and test, and you see the final animation where things are more or less spaced out in a naturalistic way. Everything isn't kind of stacked on top of each other. Not much happens. We have some gradual changes, some smoother, more granular changes. So that's it. Great job.